Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to your Monday edition of Pelicans Daily, brought to you by FanArch. I'm your host, David Grubb, editor-in-chief of thebirdwrites.com. Well, even though Willie Green doesn't appear to be going anywhere as the head coach of the New Orleans Pelicans, one of his assistants may be on the move. According to a report by Hoops Hype, um, James Borrego is a target of the Phoenix Suns in their head coaching search. That isn't a real surprise. Borrego is highly thought of around the league, particularly for his offensive acumen. That has not really been evident the last two seasons while he's been with the New Orleans Pelicans. In his first season, the Pelicans did have a highly ranked offense as far as its efficiency and its offensive rating, but it didn't really play still like a Borrego offense. In this past season, with all the injuries and whatnot, it really just kind of disintegrated for the Pelicans. But it wouldn't be a surprise, I don't think, that there are a lot of teams interested in Borrego because offense continues to be the thing that teams are focused on and they want to build around. And Borrego is seen as one of the best at generating offense for his teams, particularly in creating 3-point looks. And then the other part is after two seasons, Borrego certainly on. You wonder how much influence he's really had with Willie Green, and if you were going to continue on as even an associate head coach, is this the best situation to do so? It felt like David Griffin was always priming James Borrego to be there in case Willie Green failed. And according to reports, that Griffin wanted to replace Willie Green in January of this past season and then put Borrego on the bench and see if anything at least changed. And I think the discussions around that were valid. Um, Even if you didn't intend to have Borrego around long term as the head coach, let's say you went into this offseason and you were still looking to replace your head coach long term, and there are a number of candidates out there, certainly, that if you were going to replace Borrego, you wanted to at least give him the opportunity, I think, with the Pelicans to see if he could institute his system. Even if the players were going to change due to injury, even if you were going to move on and have different guys in the offseason, I think you wanted to see if you could play that kind of system with Zion Williamson. And you never really got to see it, even though there were remnants of it in the Point Zion era under Stan Van Gundy. That was a lot of increased tempo. That was a lot of shooting threes early in the shot clock based off of Zion creating uh, gravity and driving into the paint and having defenses collapse and getting those 3-point shots up. But you just didn't have the personnel who wanted to execute that understand, and then you didn't have the power really to execute it under Willie. It just didn't seem that the franchise ever had a will to implement James Borrego's offense. If he returns, we'll see if they try again for the third time. But if you're James Borrego, I think you'd have to feel kind of like you run against a wall here. That you've done all you can, and that even if there's a new face, are you going to have that same kind of power or influence in the locker room that you once had? Do the players view things the same way? Whether they view Borrego as having a voice before, how do they view that with this new power structure with Joe Dumars and Willie Green and Troy Weaver all stepping in? So it remains to be seen what happens to the Pelicans coaching staff. Again, just the recent reflection of the Dumars press conference. Most of the staff was there. Borrego was not. Um, but most of the coaching staff was there for the Dumars announcement. We'll see what happens going forward, but losing Borrego would be losing a talented offensive mind, even if it has not worked out the best with the New Orleans Pelicans. I think it will work out somewhere for him eventually. Another person that could be on the move, and the question has been around him for a while, is CJ McCullum and whether or not the Pelicans need to trade him. Now, CJ, of course, is going into the final season of his contract. And I think that there's folks who unfairly blame CJ for some of the ills that this franchise has had. I don't think you can do that. CJ McCullum was brought to New Orleans to be the third guy behind Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson. Far too often, he was forced into being the number one guy or the number two guy. And when he had to be the number one guy, he had to do that as the point guard and not as the shooting guard, which is his natural role. He's a guy who creates shots for himself, was really good at one-on-one basketball when he came in, and creating for in the pick and roll. He worked a lot. Obviously, he and Dame Lillard were one of the highest pick and roll tandems in the league when they were together in Portland. That wasn't the case in New Orleans. He had a different role he had to play. And ultimately, he had to adapt his game and become far more of a volume 3-point shooter. And you saw that when he's going, he's still able to put up big nights in this league. 50-point nights, 40-point nights for the Pelicans. Had multiple 40-point games this past season alone, and rapidly climbed up the list in a very short amount of time on career 3-pointers for the Pelicans, and the franchise becoming the all-time leader there. And then total points being in the top 10 there in a very short amount of time. He has made his contributions, but the timetable that CJ McCullum was on is now very different, because I think before the Pelicans were anticipating that in this, what would be his fourth season coming up, the fourth year, that they'd be a team in the top four in the West, competing for Western Conference Finals opportunities or the NBA Finals. They are not that. They're coming off a 21-61 season, and again, I'll say this, in my opinion, the worst season in the history of the franchise based on the available players, the intent at the beginning of the season, and the outcome. You finished in the bottom four in the league. You did that in that 18-win season, but that was a team that bailed early on any chances of success and didn't have a franchise player at that point. It was just a bunch of guys who were trying to figure their way out. Your best player at the end of that season, before you drafted Chris Paul, was David West, who at the franchise still wasn't certain that he was ever going to be a star in this league. So it was a very different franchise than what you had this season coming in. So I think this was, to me, the worst season in Pelicans history. Now you've moved on from David Griffin. You've decided to keep Willie Green, it appears, and you don't know what the future is for Zion Williamson. Certainly, I mean, there are people going to say, well, you were just saying keep CJ. And I think ultimately, um, if you don't find the right deal, I would say that, yeah, it makes more sense to keep CJ, considering the lack of depth at the guard position and the lack of shooting on this roster going into next year. But the more I think about it, yeah, if you're trying to set this franchise up for long-term success, I think CJ's value ultimately could be higher if you wait till the regular season and trade him near the deadline. His value in a trade could be better. But for the sake of moving the franchise, I'm starting to come around to the feeling that now, in this offseason, could be the time to move past CJ McCullum, to give yourself a better opportunity to shape the identity of this team going forward earlier, to start putting the players in place that you want as far as the future of the franchise, and moving beyond CJ in that regard, rather than using him as a stopgap in a season that at best you're going to be fighting for the play-in. Um, and also for CJ at this stage of his career, what is his motivation? He's going to be a professional regardless. I think we all expect him to come in and play his best, regardless of the situation and the circumstances. We saw him do that this past season, even though it was out of hand very quickly. I think by late November, this past season was generally viewed as over. But CJ McCullum had some of his best games in January and February. Really showing that he could still be an elite scorer in this league at times. So I think for CJ and his timetable and his career, to move on and allow him to also find that team that he can make a home with for this stage in his career, that he's also preparing to go into free agency as again in the last year of this current contract, and he's trying to secure his future, give him the best opportunity to put up the kind of numbers that are reflective of his abilities at this stage of his career, and the opportunity to win the most games. I think you do all those things and you can still benefit by getting the right combination of players or picks back. You may take back a bad player contract in the short term in order to set yourself identity-wise, if you're taking back the right number of picks, if you're taking back a skilled younger player that could be an asset to you at this stage. Yeah, I think it's time to move on from CJ McCullum. That is not, again, any indictment of what CJ's value has been to the New Orleans Pelicans. I think he has gone from a player that was viewed as a savior kind of figure his first season, coming in at that trade, having to replace guys who the fan base really liked, and then him and Larry Nance ingratiating themselves to the Pelicans fan base very quickly, helping getting that team into the postseason and playing well for the most part there. Um, and again, just showing up and being a professional. If CJ McCullum is done, then I have to say that he's a guy who always showed up and answered questions. Win or lose, CJ was the pro in the room. And you heard his attempts to try to reach Zion Williamson, try to reach some of the guys on this team at different stages and help them understand what it means to be a pro and what it means to be, you know, a star in the NBA. And again, maybe it didn't work the way you intended it to, but I don't blame McCullum in that situation. The flexibility that you could get with that money too is if you are trying to sign a key free agent, like we talked about. Miles Turner made I think 19.5 million this past season. I think if you can get rid of that CJ McCullum deal, then that's money that you can offer to a Miles Turner above that 19.5 million and see if you can be um, competitive for that. Or that's money to go after somebody like Brooke Lopez, another unrestricted free agent who could potentially pair well with Zion Williamson. Or do you use him to try to get Sabonis from Sacramento and make that deal finally work so that you have somebody in Sabonis who, yeah, doesn't improve you defensively, but neither did CJ. But what you're getting is a younger player, slightly younger than CJ and Sabonis, who's going to give you physicality, who's going to give you offensive rebounding and defensive rebounding, who can be a focal point of your offense as far as passing the ball and allowing players to use him for screening and cutting. And an intelligent basketball player on the offensive end who I think would pair well with the skill set of Zion Williamson and Trey Murphy. So if you could use CJ McCullum in that regard for a Kings team that could be losing a Zach Levine, that could be losing, other players and moving on from them and looking for some offensive production, there's another potential trade partner for CJ McCullum. So I think it's, yeah, it's I wouldn't be mad if CJ McCullum is on the roster to start next season, but I think more and more likely it becomes the best thing for everyone involved to move CJ and try to find ways to upgrade the real areas of need on this roster. I think again, if you move on from CJ, that opens up opportunities for a guy like Antonio Reeves. It opens up minutes for Brandon Boston Jr., who you still have under a reasonable contract, and you'd like to see what he can do with a larger role. And see if he can make shots consistently as he develops as a player. So I think that there are opportunities there. Of course, Jordan Hawkins is still on the roster, though I think that the Pelicans should move on from Jordan Hawkins. But you do have him potentially to fill in again for in that role of a shooter off the bench if you do move on from CJ McCollum. But I think, yeah, again, I would say it's more and more likely to me, and it feels more like it's the right time to go ahead and move on from CJ McCullum. Um, there are always more trade rumors around Zion Williamson, and the latest one has that the Pelicans and the Bucks could be working on a deal this offseason for Zion Williamson, that could be the best interest for both franchises. Now, Brett Siegel, who's an NBA insider, has said he's, reporting that the Pelicans are kind of gauging what kind of return that the Pelicans could find for Zion. Um, Certainly, the Bucks become a team that, if they get beat again here in the postseason rather easily, um, though they have fought their way back into the series, the Bucks could be looking to make changes. It has not worked with Damian Lillard, or if Giannis wants to get out of town, what do you do to appease that team? What if the Bucks are interested in getting Zion Williamson and say that they've built around similar type players? They could go a little bit cheaper because of the kind of money that they've spent in the past. Could they move on and then utilize Zion as the new Giannis and then try to build around him there? Who knows? But that is now the word around the league that the Bucks could be another potential spot. We'll get plenty of these throughout the offseason as teams try to pry Zion Williamson away from the Pelicans for less than his market value. I mean, that's what you would do if there were reports that the franchise isn't particularly happy with you, that there are new people in charge in the front office, then maybe it is time to try to make that move. And I think that teams will try to position themselves and we'll have to just monitor it and see what goes on, though I still remain skeptical of the Pelicans really making this deal so quickly. I think Joe Dumars wants to see what he has in Zion Williamson and find out if that marriage could still work, if he can be the one to salvage it and find the right combination of players and personnel around him to really make him the kind of player that the franchise expected when they drafted him in 2019. All right, we go back to our evaluation of Pelicans players and their seasons, and this player is becoming more polarizing than I thought he would be. But Herb Jones had the most disappointing season of his Pelicans career. And that's really easy for it to be because, quite frankly, the first three seasons of his career were all, better than you could have hoped for, considering where he was drafted and what you ended up getting. And I, firmly remain committed to the idea that Herb Jones is the kind of player who helps teams win basketball games. The big question is, can the Pelicans afford to keep him around for the near future? And that's what people have asked. Has he peaked in value, and should the Pelicans move on from him, considering where he is with his relative value? Now, for me, the player that I've liked to compare Herb Jones to, and I've done this before, and you can look back and find it, but I think Herb Jones, when you look at him as what the best case scenario could be for a guy like him in today's NBA, who would that player be? And I think the guy that I come to as far as that comparison is Derek White of the Boston Celtics. There's a lot of similarities to them physically. They're both about the same height. They're both older players who came into the league, after 4 years of college. Were kind of under the radar players. Were kind of given responsibilities on teams earlier than maybe they were expected, for different reasons, of course. One via injury and one just for a team that kind of thrust itself into a rebuild in the San Antonio Spurs for Derek White. But shooting wise and athleticism and what, both of them being good perimeter defenders, elite perimeter defenders for their respective teams, there's a lot of similarities to Herb Jones and Derek White. The things that have asked of them are different because Derek White was clearly a primary ball handler when he came into the NBA, and Herb has not been that. He's much more of a connector as far as it goes in passing game, is making sure that he can, he makes the right reads, he makes good decisions. He makes your offense better on the court, but he's not the guy who's making the ultimate decisions typically. Though his assist numbers, Herb Jones puts up around 4 assists per game, which are pretty solid considering the Pelicans offense and the tempo of it on a night-to-night basis and his role within it. But that comparison, I think, is valid. So what do you want to see if you want to see Herb Jones get to that place as far as in the league, to see him be the kind of guy who's giving you more than 15 points per night, is also an elite defender on the perimeter, and is making a high volume of 3-point shots? Well, I think that's the biggest part of this for Herb Jones because when you look at their overall career shooting numbers, and you take this year, and yes, this was Herb's worst shooting year by far, but you also have to account that he was injured basically from the start of the season, and was never really in shape to make a contribution, couldn't find a rhythm, and the offense was a new offense with a lot of new players, and him trying to find his way in that. So you take this, and this was his worst shooting numbers of his career by far. But for his career, and for the last couple of seasons in particular, more than 50% of his 3-point attempts, and this is the big thing for somebody like Herb Jones on offense, more than 50% of his 3-point attempts are corner threes, which is what you want from him. And he's making just over 40% of those. You want to see that number come up a bit higher, but he's taking the right shots and he's making them. He's at 48%. He made 48% of his corner threes in the 2023-24 season. That number was down this past season. Again, his worst shooting numbers pretty much, but he's still at 46% combined on his corner three-pointers over the last 2 seasons. That is great production right there. So when you look at Derek White, though, Derek White is shooting a higher percentage of his shots from 3 since joining the Boston Celtics. 61%, almost 62% of his shots are 3-pointers overall. So more than 62% of his field goal attempts overall are three pointers, and then um, about 20% of his attempts are corner threes. So he's a much more of above the break three-point shooter because of the way the Celtics offense works. But his overall percentage of shots that are three pointers are much higher. I think what you want for Herb Jones is to get his 3-point percentage as far as the amount of attempts a little bit closer to 55% for him over the course of a season. 55% of his field goal attempts or higher should be 3-point attempts, but it should be that should be the minimum that the Pelicans are trying to get for Herb is 55% of his shots to be quarter threes. With Trey taking more of those above the break threes, that's being his forte, and that giving him basically on that movement, that's where you expect Trey to take more of his threes. So if you have those two guys in your lineup right there, and you're accounting for where those shots are going to come from, then that's where they're going to be with Zion Williamson doing much more of the driving. And then we'll see where and if you got a center there in the dunker spot, if you've got a spacing center there in the opposite corner and moving into that area, or they're rebounding in that in the position in that mid area on the opposite side of where Zion is, and then your guard, your point guard, if Zion is driving, you're expecting that guard to either be occupying your corner or out on above the break for that kick out from Zion Williamson on the opposite side. So, Herb Jones should be taking those corner three pointers based on where the Pelicans' strength as far as their offense operates. So if he's taking a higher percentage and still making roughly 40%, if not more, if he's making 46% from that corner three, then Herb Jones becomes a much more effective offensive player. And I think with the questions of his overall value are diminished. That one change alone makes Herb Jones a far more valuable player. But then when you take into consideration that Herb's contract again is so small. We're talking about just under $14 million this upcoming season and just under $15 million in the final season of his contract. He's an incredible value based on what his contributions are to your team. At 26 years old, his upside is not there physically, but his game can improve. And he's somebody that, is going to continue to observe, continue to watch film, and is going to continue to work really hard. I think the other part of this is if you want to maximize his values, you can't play him at the four anymore. This can't happen. He's not built like Drew Holiday. He's not built like some of these perimeter guys who can guard 1 through 5 because their lower bodies and their upper bodies are so strong. Herb Jones is a very slight guy. And when you take into the consideration the fact that he's not going to be able to lift his arms a tremendous amount while he's recovering from surgery, he's not going to be able to do heavy weights as far as his lifting goes while he's doing rehab. He's not going to be much bigger when he reports to camp this fall. So I think that when you're talking about Herb Jones getting much bigger than I think the 205, 210 pounds he's listed at, then uh, to me that would be another mistake for the Pelicans to put him in position to get physically beat up guarding fours and fives. Herb Jones needs to stay on the perimeter guarding ones, twos, and threes. And I think until the Pelicans' defensive personnel gets better, they shouldn't be switching nearly as much as they do. And I think if Herb is staying on the perimeter and focused on one, twos, and threes, then the Pelicans' overall defense will be better because there's less of a likelihood of him getting caught underneath the basket and in the paint, while other teams are able to drive into the paint and create opportunities to score. Because that to me, that's the best thing. If I'm an opponent and Herb Jones is switching off and guarding fours and fives, then that's my opportunity to attack the basket. I've eliminated their best perimeter defender, and I've made him a post defender where he's not nearly as effective. So the Pelicans have to stop doing that with Herb Jones. But I think overall, again, if we've been giving letter grades, I give Herb an incomplete because at 20 games, we really didn't get to see Herb Jones. And if you look at his advanced numbers, they're always going to be high. He again was top 2 on the Pelicans in on-off rating. His ability to impact the team offensively and defensively was still among the best players on this roster, even with the disaster of a season that it was, because he just makes good decisions on the court. So I think if his value exceeds even what's on his contract, because he's underpaid relative to what other starters in his position would be getting. And then um, you cannot forget that it wasn't that long ago we were talking about him potentially having a 50, 40, 90 season. If he can do that, if he can get to that level where he is, he's averaged double figures for his career, if he can boost that number to 13, 14, 15 points just by making a couple more threes per game, You know what I'm saying? That's if he's shooting those threes as a volume shooter, and the ball is moving quickly in that 1 point or that 0.5 thing that Willie Green has always been talking about, but has been a lot slower than that. If you can get that ball to Herb Jones on the perimeter and move it quickly into the corner, he's shown you in the past that he can make that shot. And it's an important shot when you're the fourth or the fifth option every time you're on the court. Can you make this one shot? And that's the corner three, and he's shown he can do it. So let's see if he can continue to do it. Because if Herb Jones is giving you 41, 42% from the corner, and you're getting him 6 shots in that area every night, he's giving you 2, 3 pointers every night from that spot, then I think that he's a weapon for you on both ends of the floor and could contribute to the Pelicans even next season, even if you're rebuilding or not. And I think if you do decide to rebuild, if you do decide to move on from Zion Williamson, the cost of keeping him is not prohibitive enough to get rid of him when you're still trying to learn how to win. Because if there's one thing you know is that Herb Jones, no matter who is on the court, makes bad players better, makes good players better, makes great players really, really great. So I think that if you are rebuilding, you want Herb Jones around. If you're trying to win, you want Herb Jones around. As long as he's able to stay healthy this upcoming season. And I think that his past indicates that he should be. He's a guy who averaged 73 games per season over his first 3 seasons. This was an aberration. You don't, take the kind of injury that he took, having somebody fall on his shoulder and then getting banged up in the post. Those things, you don't expect them to happen twice. Those are kind of the fluke injuries for somebody in his position, as long as the Pelicans don't put him in harm's way. All right. So that'll wrap up today. Please continue to show your support. I really appreciate it. Just the growth has been really humbling to watch. And I'm really appreciative of everybody who tunes in and leaves their comments. So please continue to do so. Leave your likes, your comments, your questions, and please subscribe and share to other Pelicans fans. Let them know that Pelicans Daily is out here and doing our best to give you Pelicans coverage and insight each and every day. So we're here Monday through Friday. You can catch me on social media as well. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram and TikTok. And you can check thebirdrights.com for your Pelicans news and information as well. Till the next time, I'm David Grubb, and this has been Pelicans Daily, brought to you by FanArch. Y'all be good. Have a great day.